Okay, so we want to welcome you to this class. This is Bible Geography 2, and this is lesson number 3. So if you want to easily access these classes or even previous classes or even other institute classes, you can always go to our website at hbcnyc.org. You'll see a YouTube icon on our website. Click on the YouTube icon. You will go directly to our Heritage Baptist Church YouTube page. We have a YouTube page, and now we have getting up to hundreds of videos on our YouTube page. So at the top, you'll see different things, but you'll see a playlist. So all of our classes are categorized in their own playlist. So this is Bible Geography 2. The first semester was Bible Geography 1. That's how we're labeling it. So you can easily access the present classes and past classes there. And go to our YouTube page. We also have other things. We have our Daniel skits. We have music, some music things from our wonderful musicians of Heritage Baptist Church. I was teasing one of our great musicians. She on perfection. And Hillary never commented like that from one of my sermons. So I understand. She never said that. Okay. So, yeah. Okay, so we're going to look, we're on page 8 in our notes, and this is early conflicts and invasions, and we're in a very long chapter. This is a difficult chapter in this book. Chapter 10, the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. This is the separation of the one kingdom after Solomon. Who was the king after Solomon? Who took over for Solomon? His name was Rehoboam. And then Rehoboam listened to the counsel of the young, or the young, and not the older generation. Listen to the millennials and not to the seasoned citizens. And the kingdom divided. And of course, who became the first king of the northern kingdom, Israel? His name was Jeroboam. Now, where did he work previous to becoming that king? What did he do?
He worked for Solomon. He went to Egypt.
Right. Yeah, and we talked with that. That was also in our notes that he was one of Solomon's forced laborers, and he went into exile. And then God raised up Jeroboam because of Solomon's sin to be a thorn and to create disruption in the kingdom. And that's what we also see even throughout the Kings. I really like the Kings and the Chronicles and the narrative literature, because we see sin has its consequence many times, and we'll see that also. So here we are. Letter A is the Egyptian threat, and we're on page 122 in our books of the Holman Bible Atlas, and we'll be following along with that. So, sensing weakness in the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, the Egyptian Pharaoh, and what is his name? What is the Egyptian Pharaoh's name? His name is Shishak, and he is referenced in our Bibles in 2 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 2. We see it there. Came to pass that in the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem, because they had transgressed against the Lord. So God raised up an enemy of a threat to the nation of Judah. Okay, so they plundered. It says they came to plunder. Now, what was Rehoboam? What had he done previous to this? Number 2, Rehoboam had already strengthened the cities for defense in Judah on the Shephelah. That's the blank number 2. And that's spelled Shephelah. And that's a Hebrew word, and it's translated in our King James Bible, the Shephelah. You can actually, if you look up what the Hebrew is, it says Shephelah. Just like south, the King James word south, relating to the geography of Israel, means what? We've said that a number of times. It means the Negev, which also we've talked about the Negev. That's the southland. The Shephelah is translated vale, plain, the low plains, the low country. And I have some of the references. We might bang into it, just run into these references as well. But this is what Rehoboam does. So look in chapter 11 and verse 5 there, where it says, and Rehoboam dwelt in Jerusalem and built cities for defense in Judah. He built even, and here are the cities, Bethlehem and Etam and Tekoa and Bethzur, Shoko, Adullam and Gath, and Marishah and Ziph and Adonai and Lachish, Azekah, Zorah, Ajalon, and Hebron, which are in Judah, and in Benjamin, fenced cities. And he fortified the strongholds, put captains in them, store of victual and of oil and in wine. Okay, so he strengthened all these cities. Now, if you look in your book on page 121, it's map 58. Let me go there. There's map 58. And literally every one of those cities. Now, so just let's look at this map for a moment. Map 58. And you see the little white dots, I should say white squares with a black dot. Yeah, all those cities, those are the ones that we just referenced. So find Bethlehem, which is just south of Jerusalem. You see Bethlehem? Mm-hmm. Find Etam. That's just a little bit west of Bethlehem. Find Tekoa. You got it? It's south of Bethlehem. Find Bethzur. Right? It's a little bit south, kind of central located. Bethzur. What's the next one? Here's Bethzur. What's the next one? In the second Chronicle. Shoko. Okay, find Shoko. Okay, it's up here. Shoko. Okay, keep going. What's the next one? Adullam. Okay, who went to Adullam? David.
David Adullam cave.
Below Etam.
Oh yeah, Adullam, right here. Okay, so they're all there, and so it's kind of cool to look at these maps. So notice all these cities, though, they're surrounding Jerusalem. So this is the Shephelah area, and also the hill. It's also hill country, and he sought to fortify these cities, believing that he was going to protect Jerusalem. But because of his sin and his rebellion, and especially in relationship to his evil worship, because look what it says in 2 Chronicles 11:15. What did he do here? It says he ordained him priests for the high places and for the devils, the demons, and for the calves which he had made. Excuse me. You have to wonder whether he was trying to imitate Jeroboam's calves that he had put in. What were the two cities where Jeroboam put those calves and set up?
Dan and Beth.
Dan and very good. I knew you knew all this because you guys studied hard. And Dan was Dan in the north or the south?
North.
The north. Bethel was in the south, a border city. So this is wicked. And as you read the Kings and Chronicles, and when it says every king of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, the essence of their evil was always what? In what area? Their worship. That's right, their false worship. The most important thing about us is what we believe about God and how we approach him. So this is what he did. And so when it came to chapter 12, it says it came to pass when Rehoboam, in verse 1, had established the kingdom and strengthened himself. What did he do? He forsook the law of the Lord because he was doing things like that. And so God raised up an enemy, Shishak. And so that's number 3. Nevertheless, when he felt strong, what's the blank there, number 3? He forsook the law of the Lord. Shishak came out of Egypt with the 1,200 chariots, 60,000 horsemen. And he took, notice what it says in verse 4 now. What did he take? The fenced cities, which pertain to Judah, the cities that Rehoboam had planned to build to protect Jerusalem. And what did Shishak do? He took those cities, and where'd he go? Into Jerusalem. Now, our book makes a very important point. If you look on page 122, in the column, the narrow little column, right in the middle there, if you look there, who could read that statement that begins with Shishak did not intend? Do you have that, Ruth? Could you read that, please?
Shishak did not intend to occupy Palestine, only to plunder and perhaps gain control of the lucrative caravan routes of the Negev and wilderness south of Judah. Several fortified settlements in the Negev built between 1000 and 900 BC were destroyed shortly before 900 BC, probably as a result of Shishak's campaign.
Okay, so number 5, what is the blank there?
Occupied.
Occupied, according to that reading. So this is what Shishak does. He comes out of Egypt and he plunders in the southland, the Negev, also in the Shephelah here, and even into these hill country areas, into these cities. So again, I believe understanding the geography helps us to see that man's efforts to bring protection to himself, if he's not walking with God, will still fail. He did everything humanly possible, so to speak, but he didn't seek God. He forsook God, and that opened himself up for attack. Okay? So that's a little bit of the Egyptian threat. Now, let me just actually go back for a moment. I meant to do this, in fact. And it's good to put our eyes on these maps and just look at them for a moment in the class here. So look on page 118. This is map number 57. Now, I'll try to bring it up here. I believe this is map 57. Okay, so this is the kingdom divided. Now, do you remember David's kingdom? And let me actually go to this map. This is where David and Solomon controlled. What differences do you see between what David and Solomon controlled and then what happened when the kingdom became divided? For example, did David and Solomon control? How far south did they control? All the way down to the Red Sea. Etzion Geber was the name of this city. It was named something else later on. And then on the eastern plateau, what did they control on this side? Remember, they built garrisons. They also got tax revenue from where? From Edom. And now what's the condition of Edom and Moab after the kingdoms are divided? They lost control of Edom and Moab. And as well, we mentioned Philistine area over here. David subdued them on a number of times, and they controlled. But as soon as the kingdom was divided, notice how Judah is no longer controlling this area. They're not controlling Edom. They're not controlling Moab. And even over here, remember they had attacked the Ammonites. And then remember how far north did David and Solomon's kingdom go? Their influence went all the way up to the Euphrates River, from the Euphrates River, all the way down to the Sinai Desert. And so after the kingdom was divided, notice how shrunken the northern kingdom had become. And we'll see this along the way as well. And so that's important for us to note, I believe, just in general about this chapter. And again, what's the spiritual lesson there? Is there a spiritual lesson of that? When you're divided, you lose strength when you're divided. And so there's strength in unity. Unity, of course, in the truth. And they have become divided, and now they have become weaker. And now these other kingdoms are rebelling against them. And I want you to, when you read your Old Testament, for example, look at 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 1, the very opening line of the book. I hope will have a little more meaning, that you'll have a little better understanding of this. Because what is 2 Kings? The very first line of the book begins. Ellie, do you have that?
2 Kings chapter 2.
Yes.
Verse
I'm sorry, 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 1. The very first verse of the entire book.
Yes, sir. 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 1. Moab rebelled against Israel after the death of Ahab. Is that the right?
Yeah, there it is. So who rebelled?
Moab.
After the death of Ahab, Moab rebelled. And so you read things like that, this area, this Moab. So that's how the book begins, that Moab was in rebellion, and they weren't in that under the control, under the authority of Israel any longer because of their sin, because of the sins of the people. Okay, so I wanted to bring that out. Also, look in, actually I meant to actually cover this. So go back to page 122, early conflicts and invasions, in that little section there. So this brings out this point that the division of the kingdom produced immediate problems. And it says both kingdoms were now what? Smaller and weaker. Division leaves us smaller and weaker than the kingdom of David and Solomon. And what is happening also after the kingdoms are divided? Now they're border nations, and there's a constant skirmish between Israel and Judah over where the border should be, especially over the tribe of Benjamin. And so there's a constant wars between them, and we read about this as well. Okay, so let's see, I wanted to look at 1 Kings 15. 1 Kings 15 on this. 1 Kings chapter 15, verses 6 and 7. 1 Kings 15, verse 6. Verse 6. 1 Kings chapter 15, verse 6. Mandela, do you have that?
Yes. All right. There was war between Abijam and Jeroboam throughout Abijam's reign.
That's 1 Kings 15, verse 6?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure what translation that is. But huh?
Okay. New Living.
Oh no. Oh, okay. So here we read, it says there was war between who? Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the days of his life. Now, who was Rehoboam? He was the first king after Solomon of Judah. Jeroboam, the first king of the northern. So they fought. All their brothers are fighting each other. So really, the history of Israel, in a way too, as we've been bringing out, Edom was a relative, from Esau. Moabites and Ammonites were relatives through Lot. The Syrians were somewhat distant, more distant, but somewhat relatives through the grandson of Abraham's brother, I believe, something like that. So, but now Israel is fighting Judah. And when you fight each other, you just get weaker every time. Now, sometimes you have to fight, no doubt about it. But many times we don't fight for the right things. And this is repeated also for 1 Kings 14, verse 30, says the exact same thing. So that's an emphasis there. and something that we should know. Okay, so let's move on from that. And now let's go to the Aramean threat. That's on map 59. That's page 122 in our book. And we see here the Arameans. So when you see Aramean in your book, what can you read also? They are the who? The Syrians. Okay, so they're called Syrians in our Bible. So don't let that confuse you in any way. Oh wow. Okay, hold up. Let me just advance this a little bit. Okay, here. Okay. And I brought this out. This is on page, there's a very good, it's fine print here, but on page 124, I found that very interesting. And I'll bring out a few points of this from our notes. So the Arameans are Syrians. They descended from Aram, the grandson of Nahor, the brother of Abraham. Laban, the sister of Rebekah, was called this Assyrian from Padan Aram also. And I'm getting that from the first paragraph on page 124. And the verses, we looked them up last week. We won't do it again, from Genesis 22. So that's the ethnic roots of the Syrians. They come forth from Aram, who was the grandson of Nahor, the brother of Abraham. Okay, so this is the area of Syria, the Arameans, the area of Syria. The capital of Syria is where? Damascus. Damascus. So you should know that, definitely. Up here, the capital of Syria is Damascus. Okay, and it still is. And it's still in the news. I mean, they're having the United Nations summit over here. And Syria is still a very restless, war-torn nation after all these years. So Damascus was located at the intersection of two trade routes, the International Coastal Highway and the King's Highway. And you can see that also in the main map. If you look at the main map on page 118, holding your finger there where you are, but you see where Damascus, there's two major trade routes that go to and then make one to Damascus. It's kind of like when Route 80 comes into Route 95 or something, just two big highways meeting. So the international trade route comes together with the King's Highway at Damascus.
Pastor, what's B? The Aramean threat Arameans are Syrians?
Yeah, Syrians. That's B. And the next one is, the bullet point is Damascus. Okay, and then, and I'm getting many of these things straight out of our book, but look, and you go back to page 123, you should underline this little sentence right under the Aramean threat on page 123, where it says, more menacing were the Aramean states of northeast Israel, especially Aram Damascus, whose kings, and what's that word? Coveted, and that's the last blank on page 8. They coveted control of the trade routes. So Israel and Syria, page 9, were natural rivals. Because of their proximity to one another and their desire to control the King's Highway. A number of their kings took the name in our Bible of Ben-Hadad. Okay, so that's the bullet point. The second blank, page 8, not still there. So the first blank is they were natural rivals, and then they often took this name Ben-Hadad, which means the son of a storm god, Hadad. And this is also, this is on page 124. Did you read that? If you see where it says Aram Damascus on page 124 in the middle of the page? And it says Damascus is an oasis city. It's in the middle of a desert there. And then some of the things we just said. The next paragraph, you see what it said. What's the first sentence of the next paragraph? See, it says, Israel and Damascus were what? Natural rival. Okay, so that's where I'm getting that. And then at the end of that paragraph, several of the Damascus kings mentioned in the Bible, some of whom bore the title Ben-Hadad. Okay, and if you look on page 123, you'll see the kings of Aram Damascus, or the Syrian kings, mentioned in the Bible. Okay, so these are the kings: Rezon, Tabrimon, Ben-Hadad 1. So sometimes Ben-Hadad 1 or Ben-Hadad 2, they won't differentiate. It's kind of like a title, like a pharaoh or something like that. But we wanna focus in on, we're gonna focus in a little bit on a Ben-Hadad, but Hazael. He will be in our notes in a moment. And I'm pointing these things out to you because this book can be a very helpful reference to you in the days ahead, well past your being in this class. As you're reading in the Old Testament and you're coming across cities, you're coming across Ben-Hadad or these different names, to be able to know that you have a reference book here that you paid for, and it's on your shelf somewhere, and don't be afraid to pull it down and look at it again. Don't be afraid to open up these other books as you study your Bible. Actually, I always, in this day and age of technology, I don't have it as much, but back when I used Strong's concordances and dictionaries and then commentaries, and when I would start studying the Bible, I'd have my Bible there, and then I'd say, oh, I got to get this book, and that was it. They got another book, put it down. Before you know it, I had like 10 books all around me, and it's a great thing to study God's Word and to do some research like that. Okay, so Ben-Hadad. So number one now, and we're going to look at this map now on page 122, map 59, of some of the attacks. So the first one is King Asa. He's going to appeal to Ben-Hadad to help in his border war with Israel. And what happens to Asa because of this? 1 Kings chapter 15. This is also in the Chronicles, but we'll just look at it in the Kings passage. 1 Kings chapter 15 and verse number 16. And what does that say? 1 Kings 15:16. Jenny, do you have that? Could you please read that?
And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days.
Okay, just like Rehoboam and Jeroboam, the wars continued between Judah and Israel, fighting each other. So Baasha, king of Israel, is going to go up against Judah and build Ramah, which is a border city between, right at the border of Israel and Judah. So he wants to strengthen this border city. And Ramah is just a few miles outside of Jerusalem. So how does Asa see that? As a threat. So Asa, not knowing how to handle this threat, and by the way, on this map, so this is a little frustrating to me. So here's the map, and because this is especially talking about the campaign of Ben-Hadad against Baasha, right? This map is specifically dealing with this battle that we're reading about, and it says that, Baasha was going to build up Ramah, but when I looked on the map, I couldn't. They didn't have Ramah on this map. I wrote it in. I wrote it in here myself. So what I'm going to ask you to do also, just so you could see Ramah, is go back to the map on page map 57. Would you rather have me refer to the map number? Is that okay? Map 57.
Yes.
And find Jerusalem, and then just go 5 miles or so north of Jerusalem. You see Ramah? What kingdom is Ramah in, according to this map?
Israel. I'm sorry.
It's in Judah. So the king of Israel is kind of saying, no, this is my city. See, so they had these border skirmishes. So the king of Israel is building up. And so Asa, to do this, what should he have done? Trusted God. Prayed. Asked God to give him strength. This is our land. But what does he do? 1 Kings 15:18. He takes all the gold out of the house of the Lord and he gives it to who? 1 Kings 15, verse 18. What does he do with it? He gives it to Ben-Hadad, this king, this Syrian king, the king of Syria, that dwelt where? Damascus. Oh, so you see this? All these details, they're in the Bible. And he says, hey, we're buddies. You're gonna help me out. And he hired the Syrian king and his army to fight his battles for him. And so Ben-Hadad came. And notice what happens now. Look at the details of the Bible now. 1 Kings 15:20. Ben-Hadad hearkened to King Asa, sent the captains of the hosts which he had against the cities of Israel, and smote where? I'm reading in 1 Kings 15, verse 20. He smote cities of Israel. What the specific cities? Ijon and Dan. And I dare you try to say that? No. Oh, good. You took me up on my dare there. Abel, Beth, Maacah. How's that? It's a good try. And Cinneroth with all the land of Naphtali. So, wow, so many cities. And of course, you just read over that. You don't want to look for where those cities are. But this is Bible geography class. So we're going to find where those cities are. So find these cities on our map 59. Can you find Dan at the very, and now follow the red arrow. And if you look at the map, you see the map, it says campaign of Ben-Hadad against Baasha, 1 Kings 15. So that's the battle we're following right there. You see that? So follow the red line. He came out of Damascus and he came to Dan. And then what's below Dan? Kadesh, Hazor. Do you see Cinnereth? And below Cinnereth is mentioned. But now what other cities were mentioned? Ijon, Abel, and they're not there. They're not in this. Okay, so I was like, where are they? So I went back to map 57. Okay, went back to map 57. And at the top here, there's all three of those cities mentioned. Dan, Ijon, Abel. You see them? They're all up there. So in other words, the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, he starts attacking cities way in the north of Israel to do what? To distract Baasha, who's trying to build up Ramah and get him out of there. So he goes to protect these other cities. So did it work? Did it work for Asa? His plan worked. But and here's a difference between the Kings and the Chronicles. When you read the Kings, it seems everything worked fine. And then it just goes on. Verse 22, actually, 1 Kings 15:20, King Asa made a proclamation. None was exempted. They took away the stones of Ramah, the timber wherewith Baasha had builded. And King Asa built with them Geba of Benjamin and Mizpah. In other words, so he stopped the building plan of Israel, and then he fortified it himself. But there's no lesson there. Now go to 2 Chronicles. Let's go to 2 Chronicles, chapter number 16. And God sent a prophet to Asa at that time. And what did he say in 2 Chronicles 16, verse 7? Who's got that? Frida, do you have 2 Chronicles 16, verse 7?
And at that time, Hananiah the seer came to Asa, king of Judah, and said unto him, because thou hast relied on the king of Syria, and not relied on the Lord thy God, therefore is the host of the king of Syria escaped out of thine hand.
Okay, and then he reminded him of a past battle where he had trusted God. And then verse 9 is one of a great verse of scripture for us to put our eyes on the Lord, because his eyes are going to and fro throughout the whole earth. he will show himself strong to those whose heart is perfect toward him. So what did Asa do in trusting the king of Syria and not trusting God? What does God say through the prophet? Herein thou hast done what? Foolishly. And so from here on out, you're just going to have more war. And Asa, even though he may have felt for a moment the thrill of victory, in the end, he knew the agony of defeat. Remember that one, the thrill of victory? Because he got a foot disease, so he knew the agony of defeat. Defeat. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. Okay. I can't resist that one. That's like, okay. So number 2, moving on. Ben-Hadad, the second. Now there's a whole chapter here. We're not going to read this whole chapter, but it says he's referenced. This is another Ben-Hadad. Ben-Hadad number 2. He joins a large confederacy, 32 kings, and they come against King Ahab in Samaria. 1 Kings chapter 20, verse 1. We see there Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, gathered all his host, and there were 32 kings with him, horses, chariots. He went up and besieged. So again, here's my desire, I guess, as well as we're taking this class and we were looking at these maps. So when you read that, I want you to be able to picture where Syria is in the north and east of Jerusalem, or of Israel, and he's coming down out of Damascus, out of Syria, and he's gathering now 32 kings to come and fight against Israel. It's a long chapter. We won't read the whole of it, but if you will look back on your map 59, this campaign is also shown with the orange. You see the orange arrow coming out of Damascus, and where does the arrow point to? No, the orange, to Aphek. Okay, so we read that, and that's the blank on point 2, but we read of Aphek in 1 Kings chapter 20, verse 26, where it says, it came to pass at the return of the year that Ben-Hadad numbered the Syrians and went up to Aphek to fight against Israel. And so I guarantee you, most people, when they read their Bible, they're not putting the places together, in their mind, because most of us have no idea where Aphek is unless you just take a moment and pick up a map. And where is Aphek? It's right on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. He comes way out of Damascus and he meets with his 32 kings against Ahab, and Ahab actually defeats him. Aphek is also mentioned in verse number 30. The rest fled to Aphek into the city and so forth. So anyway, so Aphek is mentioned there as a battle where Ben-Hadad II. And then number 3, yes.
There's 2 Aphek, right? There's one in this. There's one the south west.
On this map, 59? Okay, so I'm sorry, I see the one where the arrow's pointing to. Where's the other one?
By the international highway.
Yellow.
North of Basin.
I'm not seeing.
By your
Oh, way down there.
It says Aphek on the yellow.
Yeah, I see it now. So it would be this Aphek on the north side. Okay, yeah, good job. That's good that you saw the second Aphek. Got your eyes open. All right. Number 3 is Hazael, Hazael. So Hazael was not actually a king or from a kingly family. And if you even look at your chart on page 10, he seized the throne, he assassinated the king and took power. And the Syrian records call him a son of a nobody, a commoner. And yet, as this even says, the last sentence, you see the chart on page 123, the last sentence in the little box about Hazael? he was the most able of the kings of Damascus. So I put that in your notes, and you should know that about Hazael. He was the most able of the kings of Syria, and he oppressed Israel, and he is referenced a number of times. So let's just look at a few of these references that have to have quite a bit of geography in them also. So look at 1 Kings chapter 10. 1 Kings chapter 10 and verse number 2 that would be 2 Kings. I'm sorry, please forgive me. 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 32. And this again, God is using these other nations like the Syrians to come against Israel because of their Baal worship, because of their idolatry. And God uses these Syrians and the Assyrians and the Babylonians as a rod of his wrath to his people for their disobedience. And that's even the context here, where in 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 31, Jehu took no heed to walk in the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, which he made Israel to sin, which had to do with the false altars that he set up. Where did Jeroboam set up the altars? In Bethel and Dan. And it says, verse 32, in those days the Lord began to cut Israel short. Hazael smote them in all the coasts of Israel. So again, look at your map number 59 and see the yellow line coming out of Damascus and then to Hazor and then down the coast through Aphek to Aphek, number 2 Aphek, Gezer, Gath. He smote the coast, and then it says from Jordan eastward. Now watch this. Then he also smote. You see the other yellow line coming down. Notice the geographic description here. So he smote on the coastal plain, and then it says from Jordan eastward, east of the Jordan, and you see the yellow line coming down east of Jordan. And then it says the land of Gilead. Do you see Gilead? That's on the east of Jordan. Who was from Gilead? Wasn't Elijah? And the Gadites and the Reubenites and the Manassites. You might now can you find that on your map there? I'll just tell you can. So guess where you have to, okay. So I was like, oh, I want to, what is, it's interesting. Isn't that interesting to you? Why he says, eastward, the land of Gilead, the Gadites, the Reubenites, the Manassites. So go to back where we had the different tribal allotments. So go to page 84, map 39, and look at the east side of the Jordan River. And what do you see there? Again, the text of Scripture says the Gadites, the Reubenites, and the Manassites. What were the 3 tribes on the east side of the Jordan River on your map number 39? Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben. So these were tribal allotments that God had given this land to his people. And because of their sin, because of their idolatry, they didn't possess their possessions. They didn't possess what God had given to them. And so Hazael is an arm of his judgment into those different areas. And then it says from Aroer, which is by the river Arnon, into Gilead. And if you even go back there's Gilead mentioned again, and the river Arnon, which is in there. And Bashan. Okay, so go back to map 59. And so he mentioned Gilead, and he mentions Bashan. Maybe that's a better way to say it. You see Bashan right up above Gilead. So you could find these things in your map there. I kind of think that's, I don't know, maybe I'm a little nerdy, but to me it's a little fun. Okay, We're making some progress, but let me just finish with this. Number 4 is Jehoash. He took some of the cities that Hazael had taken from his son. And this was in fulfillment of Elisha's prophecy. So this also is in the Bible, and it's the last prophecy of Elisha, I believe, before his death. Yep, because Elisha dies in 2 Kings chapter 13, verse 20. Elisha died. But before he died, he told the king to shoot an arrow. Remember that he told it. How many times did, and it was Hazael. Hazael shot the arrow 3 times. And he said, you should have shot more because you could have had more victories in war. So he only shot the arrow 3 times. So he had 3 victories. And that was in 2 Kings chapter 13, verse 24. Eunice, do you have that, please? Could you read 24 and 25?
So Hazael, king of Syria, died, and Ben-Hadad his son reigned in his stead. And Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz, took again out of the hand of Ben-Hadad, the son of Hazael, the cities which he had taken out of the hand of Jehoahaz, his father, by war. 3 times did Joash beat him and recover the cities of Israel.
Okay, so Hazael died, but notice he named his son Ben-Hadad. So again, that shows it was like a title, even though he wasn't from that kingly family. But Jehoash defeated Ben-Hadad. That's the 3rd 3 times in the battle there. Okay, so the last thing here we'll say is the bullet point, considering all the enemies around them on every side. You know, you had the Philistines and the Edomites, and we're talking about the Moabites and the Ammonites and the Syrians. Considering all these enemies, how foolish to be fighting each other. Right? How foolish to be fighting each other. In spite of their difference, it only weakened them more from the dangerous enemies in Egypt, Syria, the Transjordan, even further beyond. God is going to raise up even greater enemies in this chapter, further beyond Syria. The Assyrian Empire will grow. We'll get into that next week, Lord willing. But again, the point is we have real battles to fight. We have true battles to fight for God. Let's not get involved in selfish, petty skirmishes with God's people. Okay, so that's it. We'll take a break, and then we'll get into a wonderful class in the book of the Acts.
Author number 4 is Joash.
Jehoash.